Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rinkside here with Emma Miskew and myself, Ryan Steeves. Thanks for joining us. Hey Emma.
Hey, how's it going today?
Oh, not bad, not bad. Keeping track, lots of stuff going on in the sporting world.
Oh
It's
yeah.
been a fun few weeks to track all the playoffs happening in Major League. We've got hockey, we've got basketball, we've got the PWHL playoffs, particularly in Ottawa here, at the center of it. Recently, lots on the go. What are you watching these
Uh,
days?
oh, all the sports, which is actually how we're going to segment into our topic today. A little bit about just like in high performance and for athletes dealing with the pressures that come from being an athlete, being in the spotlight or not, but a performance standpoint. I think that it's something that not everyone thinks about how challenging it can be. And I'll admit, like, the reason that this came to me because I've obviously thought about it on and off for years with playing sport, but watching the game 5 and game 7, the Toronto Maple Leafs
Oh
playing
yeah.
Florida, and just seeing how obviously their top players, some of them were not performing to the level that they played through all the whole season, and the way the fans were reacting. And I just wonder if there is a link there. And so we wanted to hop on here and talk about that and have a dialogue about why that would be.
Yeah, yeah, you're bang on. I think everybody was watching that in horror, seeing the Leafs jerseys being thrown on the ice and just feeling, a bit of empathy for these. Well, and I know the argument is always they're millionaires, they should deal with it. But it's a real thing. There's a lot of pressure that goes into it at the highest levels. There's a fan expectation that these people just deal with it and should be dealing with it and should be performing regardless of the amount of pressure being thrown on them. So yeah, I think it's a really great topic, Emma. I think it's first of all it's topical. It's happening right now as we watch these pro athletes perform, but it's also we're going to do as we always do, like trickle it down to the lower levels too. And I think we lean on your experiences, Emma. Every time I watch you guys play team home play, I can't imagine the pressure that goes in to every individual shot, staring down that ice and dealing with millimeters and centimeters.
Well,
So
it is, you do feel in the big games, in the big moments, the ones that really matter, the deciding games,
yeah,
those are the games you do feel different going into the game, during the game. If you didn't have nerves, it would be it would be
yeah,
crazy. Those nerves are there, but those nerves do impact performance in a way. And over time, you learn to deal with them and to find ways around them, but they never do go away. Which when I watching and we don't talk a lot about the NHL because there's a million NHL podcasts,
yeah.
but were watching, and I'm a Sens fan. I was not. Well, I'll just be like, I'm a classic Sens fan. I was not cheering for the Leafs, but I felt bad for them in the way that they must have felt on the ice, having jerseys thrown onto the ice, getting booed off the ice after like a rough period. And if that was us, where we were actually getting booed by our own fans, I feel like I'd just go sit in the corner and cry.
I
And
know.
so I wonder if the years of disappointed Leafs fans from them not being able to win when it really matters has caused the top players with so much talent to feel like so much pressure that they're underperforming when it really matters and when it really counts.
Yeah,
And I've been through that. Like, I've had some games with extra pressure, especially when I was younger, where if like for the whole event, I was playing, let's say like high 80s as a total. And then in that game, it's like 70%. So like there's a high 80s, like 85 to 90% shooting average down to 70, just with that added pressure of wanting to win a big game is a real thing. It's a very real feeling. And
totally.
you start to grip it we called it grip it too tight.
Yeah.
Like then you try to fix it and you're trying to get out of it. And then it becomes even harder too because you're putting added pressure on yourself trying to get out of it. And that is what I'm seeing with these teams that are underperforming in playoffs when they've had such a great season.
Yeah, yeah, that's all. Those are all great observations. I mean, we as fans watch these highly paid professional athletes and we simplify it, and then we criticize them when they're not able to do what we've seen them do routinely. And we wonder why. What is it about this? This is the $1 million question. This is why there's, tens, if not 100+ staff members on some of these pro sports teams trying to figure out who has that it factor. And the it factor being who's just a winner. Because at that level, it just matters who wins. It's all about winning. And some of the more unexpected athletes just have that innate ability to win when it matters most. And so, I'd like your views on this. And this has been studied, right? Is what is it about some of these high performing pro athletes that are able to just win and absorb that pressure and have it motivate them? And, whenever I think of this topic, I think back to Kobe, or Serena, or some of these just winners and how they are able to do it. And so a couple of things come to mind, and that is, they definitely speak in the definitive. When you hear them interviewed, there's no uncertainty as to their objectives and how they're going to go about doing it. There's a level of confidence there. And I'm not saying that Mitch Marner, using your observations, doesn't have confidence. I think we'd all say he's an incredibly confident athlete. So I think it's a package. Kobe, Serena, these born winners are literally commanding their brains to adapt and grow and problem solve and never be content, right? And I think that's one of the things that separates some of these big time winners. The other is and this I think trickles down to more the youth sport level or maybe the adolescence is connecting the why, right? Why are we doing this? And that's where I think where the process becomes the more important focus for these athletes in these pressure cookers is why are we doing this? Trust in the process. Forget about the outside noise. Forget about the objective, meaning win, and focus on that process. Let the process grind you through those nervous, difficult moments. And so, let's go to you. How, as you're stepping up to throw after Sarah, after Sarah's played her 2 stones, her 2 rocks, how much of it do you get into your process and let that sort of take over and let all the outside noise fall away?
Like ideally, you're fully into your process where you are kind of just in the zone of how you're going to throw the rock, and just in the zone about like your motor functions, not the results and what's going to happen at the other end of the sheet.
Right.
But in moments where it's high pressure, especially in like tense moments where maybe it's like this is a must make, or I'll tell a brief little story, but when we were in the Olympic trials final, which was in Ottawa in 2017, we were up a couple points at the time, and I had a very routine shot that was, if I make it, we have a pretty good chance that we're going to win the game. And at worst, even if I make it, the most they could probably do is tie. But I was visibly shaking in the hack because it was in the last end of a game where the Olympics was on the line.
Yeah.
And becoming an Olympian.
It's a big deal.
And that feeling, and you're trying to block it out, and you're like, no, I'm just gonna throw it. But it's almost sometimes impossible. Just like hearing booing or people yelling at you and that sort of thing. Like you can block stuff out, but to not hear any outside noise, I haven't mastered that. I'm sure there's some athletes maybe have. That would be very, very difficult to not hear any outside noise. Yeah. Thankfully, curling fans for the most part are quite respectful, and it's more, there is cheering, but it's not often cheering while you're throwing. It's kind of that, not quite the golf approach where it's full silence, but it's quiet for the most part while throwing, and then there is cheering. But that being said, comments from the media, from fans online, that can get to you where you see those comments or hear that in your head while you're on the ice, especially starting the game off rough, and you're like, oh, people are probably saying and X, Y, and Z, and that's getting all of that noise outside your head is quite challenging. So it's one of those things that when I see other athletes underperforming in high pressure situations, like, oh, been there, because we've all been there where you're like, that was not my best game, or I played so well all week, and then that's how I finished. And you wonder, what
Yeah.
was it that got into my head about that?
Well, and let's go back to the Leafs, for instance. This is an organization that has for years been trying to find the right mix of high talent, high character individuals that are not going to feel the weight of this organizational failure for decades, which, just can't get to these big series, can't get to the cup finals,
But
can't win a cup.
how would you
So
not? Like, how
totally,
would you not feel that?
totally.
If I was a player, like, I'd probably thrive better playing for a fan base that didn't care as much.
Yep.
It'd be more fun to win with a fan base that cares as much as they do. But
Yeah.
it looks really awful to lose.
Yeah. Well, you hear about it a lot in the NHL where athletes will sometimes choose the organizations or the cities where they can, head to the grocery store and not be visible and be seen. That's not the case in Toronto, obviously. Mitch Marner and Nylander and these guys cannot leave their condos wherever they live to go shopping without being noticed. So they see it. It's all around them. So what is the recipe, right? It's trying to find the right mix of that skill, the composure, the character that's able, who's able to deal with that. And this is the $1 million question. This is why these executives get paid a ton of money to try to find these players. So how can you come in and be so composed in that environment? It's like there's the obvious things that this is why mental performance coaches can sometimes be paid so much by these big organizations is, you have to be an oversimplifier, I think. When I watch teams compete against the Leafs in their own markets, Florida Panthers, how do they do it? Their depth, their athletes are able to simplify the hockey game into its most, literally simple elements and do that so well. Be laser focused in their tasks, the process, not focus on external noise. And that's a luxury they have. And as they walk around Sunrise, they don't have to worry about external pressures the way the Leafs players do. And so, maybe it's just that those athletes just aren't quite constructed the same way to deal with that and to get over that final hump. So it's bewildering. I know this is why there were multiple jerseys thrown on the ice. This is why they're going to clean house, perhaps. We'll have to see.
Yeah, it is it's definitely an interesting topic too, because I think obviously the fan base cares for a reason, and it's great to have a team to cheer for in your city. So Ottawa was definitely, the Sens were the underdog going into that first round. They came in with a wild card spot. And in the sixth game when they lost, the team got a standing ovation from their fans for the effort that they put into the series, which I think after the first 3 games, we were pretty happy to bring it to 6. And then you see other organizations that are booing their own team. And personally, I wonder, and we might see it, but how well those players would thrive feeling supported, because that's one of the biggest things that with my team and with our support staff, we just want everyone to feel supported, because the more you feel supported and that you're not on going to be cut, the more you feel that comfort in being able to be you and go out there and perform free. And we always say that, play free. Win or lose, we did all we can do here. We prepared right, we practiced right. So we go into these games being we can't control the outcome of these games, but we can control our preparation. So if we go in there and we don't perform, then we analyze and we say, why was that the case? But we've done everything we can up to this point. And we talk like that often to just go into the game as relaxed as you can under the circumstances. So, yeah, I wonder sometimes some players thrive on some teams. And I think the not caring at all about negative outside noise is a minority of athletes. I think that's a very hard skill to learn or to adapt. Or I know very few, and you can think of a few, maybe we were saying before when we were talking, Kobe Bryant, maybe he probably wasn't overly bothered by outside noise. It probably pumped him up a little bit, but not everyone is wired that way. So finding the right players for teams like that would be really hard. But I wonder if maybe, obviously not going to get to everyone, but for the fan base to remember they are humans. They are people's children. They are maybe parents of their own. They are
Yeah.
trying, they don't want to lose. They
Yeah.
really don't. I trust me, they don't want to lose. And getting
Yeah.
all that hate would be, imagine that someone was doing that to you and how that would
Yeah.
feel, getting all of that hate from millions of people. Like,
Yeah.
that can't be fun. I always think about that when I'm watching sports. I'm like, I feel for athletes who aren't performing because
Yeah.
I've been there, but also imagine how they feel. They
Yeah.
must, like,
Yeah.
that feels awful.
Yeah. And I think we, as consumers of sport and fans, we have a different threshold for, let's say Olympians, as we all felt that feeling sitting on our couches, feeling bad for an athlete that comes up short and maybe actually underperforms from what we've seen them do in trials or other Canadian national championships. But when it becomes these athletes who are making millions, it's a whole different story. And I think that's the subtle difference with being frustrated and throwing your jersey on the ice with an NHL player, for instance, because you somehow believe they're flawed. Like everybody understands how much Mitch Marner wants to win, and Matthews, and all these big overpaid players. It's just that these fans are saying, well, what is it? Let's find somebody who has this mythical, difficult to find characteristic that can get us over this hump. How is it that teams of the past have been able to go deeper than this team? This team is the most talented Leafs team probably in history. Why can't they get over that hurdle? So that's the really frustrating part for fans. I'm sure. I'm not a Leafs fan. I kind of enjoy it, but I can understand it. This always, whenever we talk about this, I'm a big tennis fan, and so this always comes back to Billie Jean King. I always watch the U.S. Open. It's one of my favorite tournaments, and that has to be one of the more pressure-filled environments. And Billie Jean King is, of course, the one that famously came up with the slogan "Pressure is a privilege." I'm not sure if she came up with it, but she's the one that's certainly socialized it, and it's on a big plaque as the players come out of the entrance on Arthur Ashe Stadium. And there's actually a bit of a continuation of that, which is pressure is a privilege and champions adjust. That never gets included as much. And I love that because that is that really difficult thing to find. Can you not be weighed down by this, but can you take a moment to reflect on why do I feel this way? Let's try to leverage it now. And the real champions, the people that can muscle through that, are the ones that can adjust and adapt and evolve and grow and handle it. And so that always sticks with me. One of the things that gets me about pressure is, you said it, Emma, it's a skill. It's a skill like anything, and mental performance coaches do work on this a lot. This is, we should have asked Sarah about this. It's something that they do work on. So there's a lot of ways you can train athletes to handle pressure. I don't think a lot of coaches are in tune with it or included in their sort of routines of how to go about practice planning and training planning. Is this something that you work into your training, Emma? Do you try to replicate pressure cooker situations? Meaning, like, there's many different ways. Difficulty, training with difficulty. I've seen you practice, I think only once, but I was amazed at how much you were setting up shots and trying different things. So do you build in training that tries to prepare you for, at least pressure environments?
Yeah, I think that it's so hard to replicate that exact feeling of pressure because when you're practicing, that's just not real. It's so you can watch a moment and try to bring yourself back to how you felt in that moment from a big game, and then see how it affects physical reaction from it. So whether it's like elevated heart rate or remembering that pressure, but it's so hard to replicate the emotional thoughts of it. But you can try to replicate physical symptoms and then make a shot, such as increasing your heart rate in a way that you would from stress and anxiety during games and nerves. All those things do cause an elevated heart rate usually. So you can train that a little bit, but even then it doesn't come close to what those nerves and that feels like in big games. But every time you are in a big game, you're also learning and you're practicing and training that. And if it's a loss, then at least you had that experience of what that felt like, how you can try to balance off that heart rate with something else the next time you're out there. So it's all just like I feel like as I got older, it was less of a, had less of an effect on me than when I was younger because I've been in so many big games over the years. So that really helps, but it's so hard to replicate when you're not in that moment. You can't replicate having a bunch of fans in the crowd cheering while you're the only sheet on the ice playing in a final.
Totally.
You can't, it's impossible. You can try to put yourself in that spot, but it doesn't have that same effect that it does and actually being there. But I think the biggest thing is trying to bring in the big, going the other way. So in those big games, trying to bring your brain back to practice. So you can't replicate nerves, but you can replicate your practice. And so you'd be going back to, this is the line I'm trying to slide on, and this is how I want to throw the rock. And you bring your brain to the simple stuff and try to mute that outside noise is what I found to be a more effective training style for training how we react to those nerves in those big games.
Yeah.
But I also think over time, the more you've played in games and the more you win some, you start to learn how to win too. So it's kind of like those confidence players and all athletes, you can tell, like the big game players who they don't care how they've played all game. They might have not played great, but they're going to score that OT goal, or they're going to score that home run to win the game, or they're going to, like watching Roger Federer for years, a big Roger Federer fan. I grew up watching him. The amount of times that he was down 2 sets and a break in the third set and won in 5, it was absolutely unbelievable to me. And it was just the sign of someone who knew it was never over until it was actually over. And just was like, you know what, I'm going to win this next point, and then I'm going to keep winning. And it was unbelievable. I've never seen someone do that as much as he did that. It was actually very inspiring. And he's one of my favorite athletes because of that. And growing up watching that made me always think, okay, well, it's never over till it's over.
Yeah, he's so calm and collected, right? He's the master class at that. There was never emotion when it didn't go well for him.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a few things you said there, Emma. One is, I don't know if you heard about this, a Wisconsin player in the women's NCAA Final Four, I think it was the Final Four, the team, Wisconsin was awarded a penalty shot, and the coach went down the bench and basically said, like, who wants to take it? Because I think in that situation, anyone could have taken it. And the logic there was, I don't want to tell someone to take it in case they're too nervous or maybe not prepared for it. So the tactic was to go down the bench and say, who wants to take it? And Kirsten Sims puts up her hand and goes, I want it. And she went out and scored. And so fascinating psychology there to pressure and who's just ready to absorb the moment and deal with it. Another thing you said, which is, one of the more famous examples that I've seen is Gino Auriemma, the UConn women's coach, basketball coach. And he gave this great press conference once about exactly what you talked about. How do you replicate pressure and how do you deal with it? And it was a visual. So for those of you watching and listening, he'd hold up his hand and say, how do we expect to get here, really high in the NCAA tournament if we're not practicing there? And so if you practice below the level that you expect to play at the tournament, you'll never get there. You're relying on luck, right? Let's just hope it goes our way. Whereas if you constantly practice at the level that you expect to play at, and I know you can't, replicate all of the environmental situations and noise and stress, and maybe other sports, maybe sports like basketball, hockey, where there's a huge ongoing physical component to it, you can try to replicate it. He said, if we learn how to practice there, then the drop-off is minimal. There's going to be drop-off when you're on the biggest stage. It's just natural. But at least we're there, right? And that's where I think some of those fundamentals start to kick in. Michael Jordan was another one that said this. It's got to be fundamentals. So when your game goes to crap, you've got your fundamentals to fall back on, and that's what's going to guide you through those difficult times when it's not going your way or you're feeling really nervous. So I think you're right. Very difficult to replicate, but for coaches listening, there's many different tools that coaches are taught to use. There's some more that are designed for really young kids, like consequence training or reward-based training. If you do something, there's a consequence to it. If you do something, there's a reward to it. That's something you do to help kids learn how to, perform with a bit of pressure on them. I think the performer type stress, right, which is we would do a drill where we would want kids to execute on the power play, right, which is usually where things tend to settle in and players can get complacent. Well, if you make them skate a lot, so their heart rate, as you said, really climbs, now they have to perform something under duress where their heart rate is pounding. It's a whole different way to replicate that. And so there are lots of tools for coaches, and I think it's up to them to find ways to help their athletes train at that level. Because if we're not even training at the level that we're going to play at, there's really no other way to cope.
Yeah, definitely. I from a different angle. So I always have sort of wondered this because I grew up like I was a perfectionist, and I think that a lot of athletes are. I think that that's what you're
Yep.
fine. The detail that you put into and the hard work that you put in is from a perfectionist angle usually. And also performance and winning and losing really matter to me. I was competitive in everything my whole life. But I wonder how much of that is innate and what was learned. Because when we're born, we're not competitive. We don't care what other people think of us. This is something that we learn as we get older. So, what do you think about it being somewhat of the way that we're brought up with our parents wanting us to exceed or succeed in sport, and wanting to stay in and wanting your kid to make the team and tryouts, and the way that parents engage with their kids in these situations versus what the actual athlete would have done on their own? And it's interesting.
That's a great question.
Like I'm curious what you think about this because I feel like it was mostly learned for me because my parents wanted me to succeed. And so it was like must win, must have good grades, must do all this stuff really well, which did work out, but I became very perfectionistic.
Totally. Yeah, it is a learned behavior. It's a learned feeling. I just to go back for a sec, I think it's a great question for parents to actually open the door with their kids is to, and I've said this before, utilize these car rides. Like that's a great opportunity to not talk about the game, but just to, poke around your child's head and talk to them about how they feel. And I've asked my kids before big games that I understand they're big games, but they may not. Are they actually bothered by it? Do they feel pressure? Are they feeling anxiety? Are they feeling a need to satisfy their coach or their parent or their friends, right? There's a lot of feelings going on in their head. So it's good to just sort of explore it, especially when they're young. And it's not too young at 9, 10, 11 to start exploring some of these feelings. As they get older, absolutely, these are pressures imposed upon these kids. But there's many different kinds of pressures that they're feeling. They want to be good teammates. That's a behavior that they learn too. It's taught, it's drilled on them that they have to be good teammates. It takes them a while to figure out what that means, but they also interpret that as not letting their teammates down. That's a really normal feeling for a teammate to feel, for an athlete to feel. There's a lot of negative pressures placed, right? Is if you're going to spend that car ride with your child, telling them all the things they have to do, outcomes, if you're going to drill in them that there's all these outcomes that you have to do to stay on the team, to please your coach, please your teammates, to fit in. Oh, how can you approach that game? So yeah, it is a learned, imposed behavior, I think, in many cases on young kids, but it's normal, so explore that with your kids, get them talking about it, because the more they talk about it, then they're not going to feel different. They're going to realize, wow, this is a normal feeling, right? And it's one thing to say that it's normal for athletes to feel butterflies in your stomach. The top athletes feel that. You probably feel that every time you curl. That's normal. It's how do you get through it, right? Which is the $1 million question.
Yeah, and I feel like one thing that I think could make a difference, especially kids starting to play sports at a very young age, is just ensuring that they feel supported regardless of the outcome of whatever event they were in. So whether they lost a game, whether they didn't make the team, feeling kind of that neutral, same energy versus the really high highs of like, yeah, you won, and like really excited versus being like, oh, tough one. Those two different tones are like night and day as a kid. So the more you can try to keep those somewhat more in neutral territory, I feel like the less the kids will hear the outside noise as being a problem, and potentially then later on with those external noises, maybe it won't affect them as much because they're like, well, I'm just playing a sport. And I think like one of the things that as a perfectionist, I focused a lot on is self-forgiveness, because we are all human. So none of us can be perfect. It's impossible. Otherwise, we wouldn't have sport. If people could be perfect, there would be no sport. Everyone makes mistakes out there. Everyone has highs and lows in games, whether game to game or year to year or week to week. All like there's highs and lows in sport. But being able to forgive yourself for your performance during those low times, knowing that you are human, and combating it with hard work and resilience has really helped me, because I always like, well, I have to be perfect all the time. That's just how I have to be. But that's actually not realistic. That's a very unattainable goal. So,
I mean, you get measured by it in curling. It's
yeah.
like, she's throwing 89%. You're
Yeah.
measured based on 100%, right? It's
Well,
right there.
and those stats often can get into your head because they're displayed up on the screen that you can see while you're playing. And often because all four people are involved in every shot. So sometimes, like if you're playing a certain percentage that's lower, it can be based off of shooting it wrong. But also it could be that the supers misjudged it, or that there was a bad line call. Like there are other elements to it. And so you just see this one thing that's bringing you outside of being a team player, but that puts a lot of emphasis on a percentage of perfectionism.
Yeah.
So it really bothered me when I was younger seeing comparative numbers, because there's no way to compare in curling. There's shot difficulty that could come into play. There's whether there were like errors outside of after you shot it. Also, your other jobs on the team are really important. So you always had to bring yourself back to being like, well, yeah, I missed my shot, but I just swept 4 rocks really hard perfectly and helped my teammates make their shots. And so you have to reframe that it's not all about goals and numbers and all that sort of stuff, but also like how good of a teammate you're being out there. And yeah, there's so many components to performing, but I wonder how much when we're younger, just a calm demeanor and not as much emphasis on success versus failure would help athletes as they get older.
Yeah, no, you're right. And listen, dealing with pressure is the reason we put our kids in sport. I mean, that's, we want to use sport to help teach them all kinds of life lessons, I think. And that's certainly a benefit and a consequence of sports, organized sports, competitive sports, is that you get to learn all these things, and they really are helpful in life, right? Dealing with pressure is an everyday thing. And so the more, it really truly is about coping with it. And that's sort of the theme today is it's there. It's good that it's there. How do we now deal with it, right? And something that I want to touch on, maybe I'm going to put you on the spot. I developed a bit of a list. Just as I was thinking about this topic, I wanted to speak to coaches too, because you are the frontline workers in pressure management, right? Pressure performance, like performing under pressure, comes from pressure training, right? It's how do we train each other to deal with this? And so, there's a lot of tools that coaches can use regardless of the sport. And so I have a few that I want to run by you and get your comments on quickly.
Yeah.
And that is one for me that I rely on no matter who I'm coaching, whether it was at the university level or 10-year-olds, routine, routine, routine. If on game days you're constantly all over the place as a coach and it's unpredictable for the kids, then they can't settle in and ease their minds, right? Once it's easy and they can just roll with the punches, then they can focus on the things that they do well and the things that you're asking them to do. And I think that's the same at the NHL versus U11. Literally, I think it is. They're all, you call it different things. Some of them call themselves OCD about it. Others, it's routine, but I don't know if that's part of your prep and your game day prep, if routine factors in, or if it's...
Yeah, probably too much.
Yeah.
Some of us go the direction of superstitious, but it's,
Yeah.
often like it's not real superstition
Yeah.
where you actually think if you don't do something that you won't win. But well, it partially is that way. And I know we all know it's unreasonable, but yet it's comforting. So to go through that same routine, sit in the same spots in the car, listen to the same playlist on the way to the rink, go through the same, like often wearing the same jersey from the last game you won, that sort of thing is definitely part of a comfort for routine that is bordering on superstitious, but in a healthier way than I think that there's some players, some athletes go through
Yeah,
superstitions like crazy.
totally.
But I do think the routine piece is great because it does give that comfort in performance.
Yep.
And sometimes you have to roll with the punches. Like sometimes you're in traffic on the way there and you get there later and you can't go through the routine that you'd normally go through once you get
Yeah.
to the arena. But at least having those in place so that you're using them as much as you can, I think is just calming for the brain. And it creates this almost a safety.
Yeah, and it goes with preparation, right? It's like if you're prepared, and I know the burden, there's so much of a burden on parents these days to stop our lives at 3 in the afternoon to get our kids off to their sport and make sure they're on time and they're not making the coaches mad. But all of that factors in. If you're rushed and you're not prepared, then everything's thrown off and your child feels more stress and pressure, and it's all sort of interrelated. The next one that I thought was really key for coaches to always remember, and it's really difficult, is body language and messaging on game days, right? If your tension is so high that your kids feel it and you're not approachable and you're not relaxed and you're not making jokes the way you might have on training days, on practice days, then the more they're going to, absorb that type of feeling. And on the same note, messaging, right? The science is clear for these little children's minds. Fundamentals is key. How do we go back to that? How do we just get them doing what they know? Not overcomplicating or changing messages on game days to something they've never heard, or thinking you're this great coach and you're going to add in something revolutionary on 10 minutes before the game. Great body language, simple, consistent messaging on game days goes a long way for kids not feeling underprepared and then stressed and overpressured.
Yeah, I would say that the body language and demeanor of the coach, the more consistent it can be, the more the players are going to feel comfort in that too. And the just confident body language can go a long way, even if, and calm energy. And I mean, coaching in different environments, you have to kind of up the calmness to a different level. But I think that consistency piece is key because if you sense nervous energy from your coach, it can really impact how your brain processes like, oh, do you not think that we can win?
Yeah. Yeah. Paul Maurice gave a great speech after, I don't know what game it was in the Leaf series. He said basically, we're done coaching. Like in the playoffs, we're not coaching anymore. We're just preparing these adults to go into battle in a different way. And I think the same should be said about youth coaches, right? Your prep for that game has ended. You're now into prepping them mentally, helping them settle in. Something I started to do a little bit just to add some comic relief to the room was asking kids to give pregame speeches. Getting them involved, it totally shakes up the room. Some great moments in our season came from that approach and just hearing what kids say. And they shock you. They actually start to parrot a lot of the things that they've heard, which is great. That
Yeah.
you understand that they're actually ready for it too. And the whole room gets a chuckle out of it. And, lo and behold, you loosen them up. And it doesn't always work. It's not, these are young kids. Not every little trick you try is going to be something that they write about. But, I think that body language messaging approach in those final minutes before games can really help.
Yeah, I think that's helpful.
Yeah. Another just quick point, and this probably is very true for you, Emma, which is prep for these difficult situations starts so long before the situations arise in game time. If, we talked about with my team being a playoff team, quote unquote, where your sport involves playoffs. being a playoff team long before playoffs actually started. So there wasn't this shock and this pressure like, okay, everything you did in the regular season is now meaningless. Now we're on to the real meaty part of the season where there's a lot of pressure. We started to use terms like playoff hockey, talk to them about things that they would see and be expected that would be different come playoff time long before that came up, so that when it did come up, it was no big deal, and we got to say that to them. That was the fun part. Listen, we've been talking about this for months. You're in no different situation than you were. Others are going to talk about that, but we don't really care about that. There's nothing different than the way we've been operating. So I think preparing athletes well ahead of time for those kinds of environments goes a long way.
Yeah, even acting like treat every game like it's a playoff game. Treat every game like it's the final. Getting that mindset of we want to be our best every game, regardless of what that game means. So that conversation of being a playoff team is great. We've been a playoff team since game one, and now we're in the playoffs. But since game one, we've been acting like we're already in the playoffs.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we can go on and on, Emma. This is a great topic, and we've only scratched the surface. Like, I'd love to hear so many stories of yours in these stressful moments. We'll have to come back to it. But I think people all realize that sports brings about stressful moments, and I think we all want to alleviate that stress on kids, especially at the youth level. There's a lot of tools to do it, and one, we had Jason Boivin on. Mental performance coaching is a huge tool, and parents are starting to now see it as one of those extra tools in the tool chest for their athletes' development. Use it, try it out. See if you don't like it, it's one session. But these athletes can learn a lot, and they're simple tools. Many of them are simple tools.
Yeah, I totally agree. And if there's no access yet to a sports psychologist or a mental performance consultant, you still can help your child athlete by just being supportive regardless of the outcome. And then asking, like you said, Ryan, having that dialogue, asking questions, finding out where their head's at, seeing what kind of support they need. Ask them how you could be helpful, because it's not about results at that age. It's about building great, like we said in the past, building great athletes and great people.
Yeah, resiliency. And coaches listening, work this into your curriculum, sport curriculum. This is why they're here. We're raising great humans. We're not raising professional athletes. So, work in resiliency and adaptability, and get creative and ask around. So many coaches are doing stuff to help with this. So ask around. There's a lot of fun little things you can do with teams to build this kind of skill, because it is a skill, and have fun with it.
I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Well, Emma, as always, it's great tackling some of these issues with you. It's been fun. Let's see what the Leafs do. We're all watching. See if they start to dismantle everything because of this pressure that they apparently can't handle.
Yeah, well, we'll see what comes, but still lots to talk about. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We appreciate you all listening, and we'll be back soon.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.